We are in Wei Xin prison camp in the coastal province of Shandong. All of the prisoners are out, and there has been a starting line drawn in the sand. Eric Liddell is one of the runners for this race. 20 years earlier, he won a gold medal at the Olympics in Paris, France. And now he is caught in the middle of World War II, a prisoner to Japan in China. The route of the race will skirt along the outsides of this prison camp, and so they will run just inside of the fences. It will be about a half-mile race. The camp is about 3 acres. All of the guards are lined up to see it. Everyone who can't run is watching. Anyone who can run is trying to beat Eric. He wears a shirt that's cut out of kitchen curtains and baggy shorts that are beyond his knees. He's 40 years old and beautifully bald. But he's also pitifully thin and malnourished, going from, in his 18 months in this camp, going from 160 pounds to about 125. Normally, they wouldn't have sports days at this camp. They have one this time because they are celebrating the dropping of food from the American Red Cross. And so the race is a celebration of that food being dropped for them. Eric Liddell should not be running in this race. There's something wrong with his health. Intuitively, many of the people in the camp know that there's something wrong, and it's something beyond just hunger. Many have noticed the downturn in his health and how he labors so much harder to do the tasks that were once easy for him. But he will not stop serving, and he will not disappoint. The only concession that he makes is in every race he's ever done up to this point, in every single race other than the official Olympic races, he's always given a little bit of a head start to everyone. In this race, he will give no head start. His speech lately has become blurred or kind of hard to understand, and his vision has become blurred. But he continues to rise before dawn every single day. He cooks, he cleans, he repairs, he sews, he teaches the children, he does physical education with them and plays games with them and chess and checkers. And he works until about 10 p.m. each night, way after lights out. He preaches every weekend, and he counsels couples there or people that are going through hard times. He is known throughout the whole camp for his busyness, his humbleness, and his hard work ethic. Now in this Japanese war camp, there's this race along this dusty pathway. The starter with the white handkerchief raises his hand and says, "Ready, set, go." Since 2010, I have had the privilege of wrapping up the Compassion Immersion time with you every August by teaching you and exposing you to a biographical figure that I have read the previous year. I want it to be an effort where I will begin to help you immerse yourself in where we are in the movement of God in our world throughout the history of the missionary movement. The modern missionary movement began in 1793 with a man named William Carey. And for the first time, he moved to the coastlands of India And he took the gospel with him. And from that time until about the middle 1800s, almost every coastal area of the continents began to be infiltrated by missionaries. In 1865, they realized we've reached the coastlands, but we need to move inland, and that's when the China Inland Mission began with Hudson Taylor, and they began to move into China and Asia, and of course Africa, and they began to move into the continents, and there was a great wave reaching into the inland countries. Until about 1974, which we could say that there's been a missionary in every country of the world. So then we began a new movement. In 1934 or so, we began to, instead of identifying people by their country, we began to identify them by their language and their people group. And that's when the Wycliffe Bible translators popped along. They said we need to not only reach every continent or every country, we need to reach every people, and we need to reach them in their known vernacular, their known language. That every people group deserves to have the scriptures in their languages. We have not finished that task. There are still people groups in the world that do not have access to the scriptures in their language. Since the 2010, we've looked at some really interesting characters. John G. Patton, who went to an island where they ate the missionaries, and he told everybody it doesn't matter, worms are going to eventually eat everybody, so I don't mind, and he was quite the man. David Brainerd, who by the world's standards was a complete failure. But when we look back on the movement, the modern missionary movement, his biography actually spurred so many people into going into missions work. Andrew Fuller, who was the rope holder, or the guy who stayed behind for William Carey and allowed him to go. Adoniram Judson, who served in Burma and became the first Protestant missionary sent from North America. John Newton, the great hymn writer who wrote Amazing Grace, who was saved out of the slave trade. George Mueller, his community of people who rescued and served thousands and thousands of orphans. And then last year, William Wilberforce, who was credited with almost single-handedly stopping the slave trade in England. I go over these just to remind you, because I don't even remember who I've talked about. And I want to make sure that if you're interested, you can go back and find these things. These are people that you should be aware of. And this year, it's Eric Liddell. You know Eric Liddell. Some of you, I was blown away these past couple of weeks. I've talked to people on our staff about Eric Liddell, and they're like, who? And I said, you've seen the movie Chariots of Fire? And they say, no. And so just now for fun, all who are watching and all who are right here, who's seen Chariots of Fire? Okay, more than half the room. So most of you are familiar with Eric Liddell. He was a Scottish athlete born in 1902. His parents were James and Mary Liddell. They were missionaries to China, and Eric Liddell was actually born in China. His wife was Florence, or Flo, and they had 3 daughters together. And of course, the movie Chariots of Fire came out in 1981. His parents were missionaries in China during the Boxer Revolution. And if you're not familiar with this was a tremendously violent time when China tried to purge themselves of Western influence. It wasn't so much anti-Christian as it was just anti-Western. They wanted everything Western out. And it was very bloody, humongous loss of lives for all the people that were in China at the time. Somehow his parents survived that. But it was very rough and very difficult to be a missionary in the early 1900s. Very hard on the family, very high commitment that was needed. In fact, I saw that Eric only lived with his parents. I'm looking for the exact quote. Maybe it'll show up in a minute. Let me just continue on. He went to Eltham College with his brother Rob. And you'll see Eltham College SSM if you ever do any reading of him. And SSM means School for Sons of Missionaries. because no children stayed with their parents if they went on the mission field. Rob, his brother, was very outgoing and very vocal, and Eric was shy. And together, these two made up a 1-2 punch athletically that improved every single place they went. They were incredible athletes. Incredible athletes. And just to kind of put them in place, they were in high school during World War I. Eric and Rob both ended up at Edinburgh University. I think we've got a picture. Have you been seeing pictures? Yeah, there's Edinburgh. Beautiful place. And they have immediate success in track, immediate success in everything that they do athletically. And he ends up being, him and his brother become top athletes. He immediately, because of this success, he gets a coach. And the coach's name was Tom McKercher. So if you do some reading, I'll give you a couple of books that you can read after this if you'd like, the ones that I've read. And that's all I did. I just read a couple of books, grabbed a verse that means something to me when I read it, and that's what I'm sharing with you. Anybody can do this. Y'all can do this. You can do it. Because of their success, he got a coach named Tom McKercher. And when they first met, Eric Liddell came up to him and says, and McKercher says, run a lap, let me watch you run. And so Eric Liddell runs a lap, and he times him and sees how fast he went, and he comes back, and Eric Liddell says, how'd I do? What'd you think? He said, if you want a breakdown, you're going about it in the best possible manner. Eric Liddell had a very unorthodox running style where his arms would flail, and his head would throw back, and his mouth would open wide, when he started straining. In other words, he looked normal at first, but then as he got tireder, and he started to push harder and harder, his arms would flail, his head would throw back, and bam, his mouth would open as if he was like trying to catch bugs. And he became immediately successful, making the British Olympic team for the 1924 Olympics. He is slated to run in the sprint relays and in the 100 and 200 meter run. Actually, it was a 100-yard and 220 yards. And Liddell is slated to compete in both of these events. And those of you who have not seen the movie, you know what happens. He has a strong religious conviction that he's not supposed to compete on the Sabbath day. Now, this is very difficult for us to get our head around. We live in a very relaxed culture. We maybe more so than we should be. But he very much had a conviction, and my attitude is if it's a conviction of his, then he needs to follow it. He just doesn't need to ask everybody to do it, and he never did. He never said anything else about it to anybody else, but he just said, my conviction is I was raised by my family not to work on the Sabbath. I will not compete on the Sabbath. Well, the prelims for the 100 meters, which he was favored to win, were on a Sunday. And so he's traveled to Paris. He's supposed to compete, but then they find out the time. They didn't know beforehand. They find out the time, and he says, I'm not competing. He runs in the 200 meter or the 220-yard dash, and he wins a bronze medal in that event. But he misses the 100. And then after that, he gets the opportunity to run in the 440-yard or the 400-meter race. I want to read you a few quotes out of this book. This is the author's account of the race, the 440-yard, or one lap, if you're not familiar with track. Let me just read it to you. It's a little bit long, but I think it's worth it. A voice from the loudspeaker called for quiet as the starter raised his pistol. You can actually get online. This is amazing. You can get online and watch this dude run the race. It was such poor quality on YouTube and stuff that we're not going to show it here, but it's just amazing. You can watch him, and he's flailing and throwing his head back. You can kind of see it. I mean, you got to take it for granted it's him. You can't see his face well enough to know, but I'm guessing it is. If it's on the internet, it must be true. Then they had a command for ready, start, go, and the sound of the gun and a clean start brought a roar from the crowd that increased as the runners ran down the track. Abraham's, a friend, a teammate of his, his brow furrowed with concern as he watched Eric sprint the first 100 meters instead of 400. As if he were running the 100 instead of the 400. He can't possibly keep this up, is what people murmured. Nearing the halfway point, Eric led by 3 yards and was clearly running at full speed. Those in the stands, timing with their own watches, shook their heads in disbelief as Liddell had clocked 22.2 seconds in the 200 meters. There was no way he could continue that pace for the entire race. With 100 yards remaining, the crowd gasped as Imbach, one of the runners, snagged a spike on a lane marker and fell to the track and unable to get up. But Eric seemed oblivious to everything except his own race. Down the final stretch, Fitch strained to narrow the gap, sure that Eric must slow down and tie up at any second. Instead, he saw Liddell throw his head back and put on a burst of speed that carried him to victory by 5 meters. Fitch, Butler, and Johnson crossed the line as Coard Taylor's ankle gave way, sending him sprawling to the track. He put everybody else in such stress that 2 people actually fell down. The crowd went wild. The man in the stadium produced a huge Union Jack and began waving it triumphantly. And Eric walked about the track, catching his breath and shaking hands with Fitch and smiling broadly as photographers swarmed around him. The crowd quieted as the voice announced the results of the race and then erupted again at the news that Eric Liddell had set a new world record, 47.6 seconds. What was amazing about this is that he had not competed in the 400 meter. They just found a space for him to run and put him in. Eric Liddell ended up being the holder of the British record for the 100 yards at 9.7. It remained the record for 53 years. That's amazing in track. Anything like that, that's amazing. He also held the 220 and the 440 relay race records as well. When asked about the race, he said, "The secret of my success over the 400 meters is that I run the first 200 meters as fast as I can. And then for the second 200 meters, with God's help, I run faster." His conviction not to compete, I don't think that the movie goes into this part, but his conviction not to compete on Sundays also cost him at least 2 more medals because he was scheduled to run on both of the relay teams, and the prelims for both of those events were on Sunday, which he did not race in, and Britain still won a silver and a bronze without him. And there's a chance that they would have done better with him. Eric Liddell becomes the most famous British athlete in the world. And he has unbelievable opportunity to be the richest athlete in the world. The endorsements, the future Olympics, he's a young man. He's got another Olympics in him at least. Instead, he makes the move and follows his commitment, which seems to be very much a hallmark of his life. Follows his commitment that after the Olympics are over, he goes to China and begins to serve as a missionary there in China. Let me write to you, when he first got thrown into prison camp, let me just read to you some of the attitude that he had. Imagine here he is, the world's most famous British athlete, and he writes in 1944 while he's in prison camp, he writes to his wife, "We have a large, airy room with 11 others. Healthy, enjoying some reading. Constantly remember and picture you all. Dearest love to all. Everything sufficient. Longing to see you. Love, Eric." Trust me, if Dana gets a letter from me from jail, it won't be that kind. I thought it might be fun to be able to see a small clip from Chariots of Fire of him running this race. And so let's just take a look at that clip now.
So where does the power come from? to see the race to its end from within.
Come on, Liddell!
Jenny, I believe God made me for a purpose. But He also made me fast. And when I run, I feel His pleasure.
His most famous quote is that God made me for a purpose, China, but He also made me fast. And when I run, I feel His pleasure. By the time we get towards the end of 1944, Eric Liddell is very sick. He has thought, as others have assumed, that he's starving and his health is going down just like everyone else. But around Christmas time in 1944, very early in 1945, he has a small stroke. It affects his vision. One of his eyes gets a little cockeyed. He loses feeling on his left side. And it's then that they discover that Eric Brain has an inoperable brain tumor. At least it was inoperable in China, in a prison camp. Right before he is about to die, in fact, on the morning of his death, he writes a short letter to his wife. This is what he says: "I have been carrying too much responsibility. Slight nervous breakdown. Am much better after a month's rest in the hospital. Doctors suggest changing my work, giving up my teaching and my athletics and taking on physical work that is more like baking. A good change for me. So glad to get your letter in July. It's February." Goes on to say, "Joyce Stanks has been a great help to me in the hospital, keeping me in touch and with the news. Enjoying comfort and the parcels. Special love to you and the children. Love, Eric." And that evening at 9 p.m., Eric Liddell dies. He remains one of the most popular athletes in Scotland's history. He has a monument to him in China, in Shandong, a communist country honoring a Christian athlete. And they still consider him their first Olympic medalist. I read somewhere in the midst of the books that in a 7-year span of Eric Liddell's life, before college, over 7 years, he only saw his parents for just less than 100 days. Because the furloughs came every 7 to 10 years, and the parents rarely had the ability to move. Travel was much slower, much more expensive. We'll send the Frozies off, and other than some family members in here that, FaceTime won't be good enough. Most of us we'll keep up with them. We'll see him on Facebook. We'll FaceTime. We'll see what's going on. He'll come back and visit. If any of us are fortunate enough to go to Virginia, maybe we'll swing by and see him. Anytime that the parents want to call, they can call. Imagine a missionary going on the field, and you knew that the cost of going on that field was that you'd never, hardly ever see your children. The same thing, by the way, happened to Eric Liddell's children. He had 3 daughters. One daughter he never saw. Now, I know that we are guardians of the family and that value, and that just seems so unremarkable to us, but that's just the way it happened at this time. Don't throw stones here. This was a different time. It was a different commitment, a different price to pay. And they gladly paid it. And they laid a foundation for something that would happen in just 20 years later, or not even 20 years later, in just 5 years later. All of the Christians would be run out of China, all of the Western Christians, which apparently was a great strategy because the message of the gospel in China has exploded since we left. I'm reminded of the verse in Hebrews 12:3. I just want to read it to you and then just highlight a couple of things, and then that's all I really have time for. But it says there in Hebrews 12, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, and the great cloud of witnesses is chapter 11. Chapter 11, all of these heroes of the faith that have been mentioned just over and over again, these people that have sacrificed. And I would say that we stand on the shoulders of people like Eric Liddell and are surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses. Let us throw off everything that hinders. And the idea here is like, it's not necessarily evil. It's not even necessarily a sin. It's just something that slows you down. Something that keeps you from your purposes. Throw off those things that easily hinders. It's the idea, the word is actually, the idea gives the idea of a loose-fitting robe that will tangle in your legs. Nothing wrong with robes unless you're trying to run fast. So if there's nothing wrong with some of the things in our life unless we're trying to follow Christ with our whole heart. And also the sin that so easily entangles us. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. The word for race is where we get our word agony. Let's have perseverance in this life that we're called to live. It's not supposed to be easy. If it's not easy for you right now, you're in perfect company. If it's easy for you right now, enjoy it, be thankful, get ready. I'm just being honest. The race that is marked out for us, that there's a particular race for Steve. There's a particular race for each of you. It's been marked out for you. That's an amazing thought, isn't it? That God has purposely designed you and plopped you right where you are because there's a race He wants you to run, and it's marked just for you. Nobody can run it but you. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus. The idea about fix our eyes on Him is to think or meditate without interruption. The author and perfecter of our faith, it all begins and ends with Jesus Christ, who for the joy set before Him. See, Jesus didn't live His life saying no to things. He lived His life saying yes to something. That was the greatest, it was the race that had been marked out for Him. And by saying yes to it, He eliminated those other things, the things that tangled Him up. He lived His life in such a way that He said yes to it. He set His face towards the cross. Scorning its shame wasn't easy. It was hard for Him. Sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. The idea of being sat down at the right hand means it's finished. It's accomplished. Jesus Christ took on the penalty of the sin of mankind, and it is paid for. It is done. You can do nothing to merit God's favor and nothing to earn it. Consider Him. Consider Jesus. Think about Him who endured such opposition from sinful men so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Now, on your handout, I get to ask this question because every year we give a very clear statement of where we are and what we've given away and how much we're hoping to do and all of those things and the needs around the world. And somebody asked me recently, man, how much, Steve? How much? Is there an end in sight? And I got an end. Here it is. Our target is 0. When we get to 0, we'll quit. When there are 0 children in foster care, when there are 0 children homeless and at risk, when there are 0 high school dropouts, when there are 0 people dying of starvation and malnutrition, when there are 0 children, 0 divorces, when there are 0 people without access to clean water, when there's 0 death to treatable diseases, when there's 0 suicides, when there's 0 children being forced into slave labor, when there's 0 racial prejudice and the white supremacist crap that we got to still live in, when there's 0 who have not heard of the love of God and had a chance to embrace His gospel, and when there are 0 churches struggling and closing their doors, we'll be about done. Inside of your folder, there is a loud card. This is the mechanism that we use to generate funds to give away. Now, it's important that you know there's other ways that we give away. And every dollar you ever give here, there's a portion of it, a significant portion of it, that will be given away. We give away dollars out of the general budget, but we would love to raise more than that. The general budget is limited. It's limited because we live in such an expensive place to live. And with multiple campuses and the cost of salaries and all of those kinds of things, we'd just like to give more. And this is the mechanism. Now, unless you have already come prayed up and ready to go, like there's probably only 2 of you ready to do that, Kayvon and his wife. Dana and I haven't even had our talk yet about this. So I'm not expecting anyone to fill this out tonight. But I'm asking you to take this card. It gives you a strategy of how to do it. To pray and ask God what you might do. Sacrifice and give up something for the sake of someone else, and watch and see how God provides. This is money that you give over and above that you're not sure how you're going to get it right now. Maybe you're going to try to give up a coffee or 2 a week and brew your own instead. Maybe you'll give up a pizza a week or eating out once a week or something, and then you will do the math and you'll write it in, and you can do that. You can also give if you think, well, the way my thing works, I've really got some money now and I won't have money later, then you can just give a one-time gift and it's done. If you're here visiting or you're here new, you probably shouldn't consider this unless you're going to hang around to fulfill the commitment, because we're going to make decisions based on this pledge. We will establish support levels for missionaries, and we will plan our coming year on this. Now, historically, let me just, y'all are we're us, right? Let me just say, historically, this is what happens. You pledge a number, and you give way more. Way to go. But it'd be better if we knew closer to what you were going to do. So if you're sitting there going, I never pledge, I'm just going to give this, and whenever it comes, I'm going to give us a guess. We're not going to hold you to it. We will not call you and say, you pledged this thing. I promise that won't happen. But we're going to try to make some decisions. So over the next couple of weeks, pray this through. Think about it. At all of our campuses, we're asking you, pray this over, think it through, and then over the next couple of weekends, probably the next 3, knowing Westgate, love y'all, but somebody's got to tell you. we'll take it over the next 3 weeks, and then we'll come up with our pledge number, and we'll go. We'll go with that. We're in the middle of just an unprecedented time. It's an awesome, awesome time. And this is a great opportunity, great investment. In fact, this is one of those places, if you're here and you're normally here, but you're for whatever reason, you're not a part of our general giving, this is a place you can give where it'll all be given away. None of this money comes to us. All of this is outside our walls. And we love for you to be a part of it. If you're thinking, well, I'm already tapped on the general offering, that's really all I can do. Give a little less in general. I know Dan Perkins is over there going, what? Just give a little less in general, make a pledge, see what God might do. Okay? All right, let's pray together. God, I'm humbled by the cloud of witnesses that surrounds us. The people that have demonstrated such a commitment to your gospel and taking it to people who have never heard. I thank you that you allow us to be part of that same effort. I thank you so much for each individual that we're able to partner with as our non-local staff that are here in this city, in this Bay Area, and then around the world. God, I thank you for allowing our paths to cross. And I pray, God, you would move in us collectively in such a way that all that you intend to get done through us will get done. All of it. Not a portion of it, God, that your will would be accomplished in this area here, right here, this loud offering. Your will would be accomplished. And I ask unashamedly for people to be sacrificial because this isn't for us, God. And then we ask that you would give us insight and contacts and abilities to work with folks around the world, that the gospel may go out and that Jesus may become more and more famous. Find us faithful, God, to do our part. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.